Talk AIG2 has been hit, the magazine wrote, suffering major in the property damage claims from Typhoon Omar and Hurricanes Andrews and Iniki. It has been shielded by the cash its life insurance and financiers continue to churn out. As it turns out, this wasn't the whole truth. Heather thought it would take another dozen or so years for people to figure that out. It is nearly impossible for derivatives dealers to never lose money, no matter how careful they are or how well-handed. Under Susan, FP had a remarkable run, creating some billion worth of long-date contracts and then ending them brilliantly as circumstances changed. But in 1993, Susan made his one big mistake. He lost a lot of money on a swap contract. By then, Susan had become extraordinarily wealthy, unlikely Remacher who lived well but not extravagantly. Susan used his new wealth to fund a lavish lifestyle. Among his residences was one in Fayette, Connecticut, a five-story mansion that locals call it costly. According to a Wall Street Journal account at the time, it boasts an elevator, indoor and outdoor swimming pools, a squash court, and an elaborate security system, including metal gates and a guard at the end of the driveway. The FP office in Connecticut and London, where every bite has lavish true to his control freak self. Susan had overseen every detail which stood in market contrast to AIG's shabby headquarters near Wall Street. Even how events transpired, it seemed pretty clear that Remacher had been waiting for Susan to slip up. The fact that Remacher had to back down in 2919 was an intolerable situation. There was only one indispensable person at AIG after all, and it wasn't Howard Sosing. 2 years after Sosing had signed his new deal, he lost in a complicated deal with Edberg, the holding company of the Canadian billionaires Edward and Peter Bronfman, according to the Washington Post. FP had a second deal with Edberg, which was not losing money but Monetels expected. Greenbacher had a document draw up that gave AIG more control over the joint venture and placed restrictions on transactions in which AIG VP could enter. According to the Rexon lawsuit, in February 1993, Susan sent AIG his notice of termination, which he sent for the end of the year. It he stayed throughout 1993. He would retain control of FP's incentives compensation, which he estimated at a million. This time, however, Remacher was ready. He set in motion a secret plan, one that embarked on a covert operation. The Washington Post would later write, enlisting the company's auditors and price control house coppers. Remacher set up a secret office near FB's Connecticut office. There they built a computer system from scratch that was able to, in effect, Remacher's engineer FB's traits, using secret sauce was now Grengeber as well. Then, when Susin began an arbitration proceeding against AIG as part of his effort to stay on until the end of the years, Remacher hit back hard. He accuses Susin of fraud and breach of duty, exactly the kit of allegations that if Prob could strip Susin of his right to any of the million. The two sides fought over Phoebe's executives, with Remacher offering them promotions and Susin dealing the prospect of a big chunk of whatever initiative compensation. He won most of the executives stayed loyal to Susin. In November, the two sides settled, with Susin agreeing to take a portion of which he paid to the executive who had left with him. A month before the settlement, Wall Street Journal published a lengthy article about the dispute, reporting that Susin was holed up with his team in a secure in Westport, plotting a comeback. But to make a comeback, Susin needed another AAA rated company to back him, and that he never found. He was never again a factor in the derivatives business. At FP, life went on. By the spring of 1994, Remacher had chosen a new executive to run AIG VP, which was no longer a joint venture but a full-fledged division of AIG. That man was Tom Savage, a well-liked FP veteran with a PhD from Claremont Graduate University who'd gotten his start working on Larry Fink's mortgage desk at First Boston. He was from Minnesota. Recalls one of his further traders. He had a quiet, unemotional, and ethical approach. Another former trader described him as mild-mannered, intelligent, and extremely risk-averse. There was no question that FP was going to stay in the derivatives business. There was also no question that things were going to be different. Remacher wanted a longer share of the profits for AIG. He wanted FP traders to defend some of their compensation in case a deal went sour. He wanted to be informed on a daily basis at FIT about every deal FP was working on, and he wanted to be sure that FP never did anything that would put the parent company in danger. Tom spent most of his time managing Hank Remacher, recalls an ex-trader. It was not an easy task. early on, Gremiker warned Savage in if you ever do anything to my AAA rating, coming after you with a pitchfork. It was probably inevitable that FP would, when they get into credit derivatives, part of its self-image, after all, come from its willingness to find the blending edge of the derivatives business and get there before anyone else. But by the late 1990, um, nothing was more blending edge than credit derivatives. In another sense, thought there was nothing inevitable about it at all. Savage, like Susin, was a firm believer in having a deep and going understanding of the rise VP talk. It was point of pride among FP's executives that although they were derivatives traders, they were unusual careful ones. The problem from AIG when it began building deals around credit default swap was that the risk models they used cement to suggest that they come with virtually no risk at all, which ultimately caused FP to lay down its guard. The traders and executives didn't do the consonant calibrating, didn't bring the skepticisms, didn't to do the worst case scenario modeling or but on the hate that they might have if they sense danger lurking. Their internal models told them that there was a percent chance that they would never have to pay out a penny. The different nature of those trades from any other trades if we had done open the door to all the problems that come about. Savage told the Washington Post it was JP Morgan that lured AIG into the credit default swap business. The bank's initial 1994 swap deal, the one that insured against an Exxon default, had gone up without a which since then JP Morgan had done a handful of similar deals while at the same time using credit default swap internally to better evaluate its loan portfolio. In 1997, after the bank lost millions in bad loans during the Asian financial crisis, the credit derivatives team was put in charge of the bank's commercial lending department, much to the horror of the old-time commercial lenders. They began using swap to perform risk analysis on the loan portfolio. Credit default swap were truly become central to the way the bank did business. As for the regulators, once they began to understand what credit default swap did, they warmed up to them. Bank regulators in turned out liked the idea of banks of letting some of their default rights to other entities. In theory, it meant that banks were less likely to fall if they made bad loans. In fact, by 1990, 1996, the Federal Reserve agreed with JP Morgan that a bank should get some capital relief if it used credit derivatives. It put out a statement saying that if a bank used credit default swap to move a borrower's default risk of its balance sheet, it will be a allowed it holds capital. What JP Morgan had not been able to create was a tradable market for credit default swap. Just such a market was important to the bank for several reasons. First, it would give the bank a new line of securities to create, market, and trade. Second, if a tradable market existed for credit derivatives, the market itself could be used to establish a company's default risk. This will give JP Morgan a better way of measuring the risks in its own commercial loan portfolio, while also giving speculators the means to bid on the possibility of a company's default, even if they had no economic interest in the company. In the late 1990, the bank, again with Billy Masters leading the way, found a way to create a credit product that investors loved. It did so by ingeniously combining credit derivatives with securitization. Instead of having a credit default swap reference reference, a single company like Exxon JP Morgan bundled together a large diversified basket of credit derivatives that reference hundreds of corporate credit. It was different from other kinds of securitization in one critical way. But those who invested in JP Morgan Innovation didn't out a piece of the actual corporate loans. Instead, they outwent credit default swaps, the performance of which was terminated by the performance of the underlying corporate credits. The credit default swap referenced the actual ones, which were owned by others because securities like these were willed out of credit derivatives rather than real assets. They come to be called synthetics. Just with mortgage back backed securities, synthetic securities were tranched, usually into three slices. The first and smallest was called the equity portion. It produced the heftiest return because it comes with the most risk in the event of a default. The acute holders would be the first to be wiped out. The second slice was called the mezzanine tranche. Its holders would begin to lose money only after the equity holders had been completely wiped out. The third and longest stretch generated the smallest return because it was supposed to carry only the tiniest of risk. Modern financial theory suggested that it would take a monstrous financial catastrophe for the defaults to hit throughout both the equity and the mezzanine tranches and hit the holders of the third tranche. After all the credits were diversified, which was supposed to ensure I disagree of safety. JP Morgan's models suggested that the possibility that defaults would hit the third tranche was so remote that the capital needed to be held against its final tranche. The bank called this tranche super senior, so named because it was supposed to be safer than even the senior AAA tranche, and in a typical securitization, the first such synthetic deal, which JP Morgan bought together in 1997, was called the Broad Index Securities Offering, or BISTR. If the name made a glaze over, the intricacies of putting in it together were even more mind-numbing. These swaps cover $9.7 billion worth of corporate credits spread out among some 307 companies, according to Falls called Gillian Ted's authoritative account of the creation of credit derivatives. Thanks to the diversification of the credits, JP Morgan calculated that only $700 million worth of notes will be required to ensure the entire $9.7 billion. So the bank set up a cell company, a so-called special super purpose entity, or SPA, to which it will make insurance-like payments. The SPA in turn some $700 million worth of notes to investors begin in December 1997. The payments from JP Morgan flowed throughout the sale company to the investors. After much wrangling, the big credit rating agencies agreed that there was very little risk in these securities and rated most of them AAA. The bistro notes were quickly snapping up. So where did AIG come in? As will so often be the case with credit derivatives, the issue had to do with capital requirements. Despite their enthusiasm for credit derivatives bank, regulators were later about Bistrom, particularly that riskless super senior trade. Yes, it will take a genuine financial calamity to get to the point where the entire $7 million will be eaten up by defaults, but that it if happened, who would be on the hook if there were so many defaults that they reached into the superior seniors? As mathematically improbable as that was, the answer was JP Morgan. For the regulators, that's all that mattered. The fact that JP Morgan was still theoretically of the hawk in a worst case scenario, as unlikely as it might be, made that the bank had not completely eliminated the default risk on its portfolio. There, Therefore, the regulators concludes banks that held the super seniors got no capital relief, not unless they could truly find a way to offload every lost penny of the default risk. Thus did JP Morgan began looking for a way to buy credit protections for these super seniors. So it could show regulators that it had hinted gotten rid of the risk and thus did it find FP, which was almost legally positioned to provide such protections because it was a derivatives dealer operating inside an insurance company. FP had no capital requirements. It was already doing a lot of derivatives business with JP Morgan, and the parent company strictly a rating meant that there could be no doubt. Could there be that if they had the financial wherewithal to back up its promise to insure the super seniors in the bistro deal, JP Morgan bought credit protection for AIG, which took on the rise of a super senior default. Not that anybody had AIG thought there was any risk. There were every bit convinced has JP Morgan. JP Morgan that this way was a riskless transactions. The models suggested that the risk was so remote that the fees were almost free money. Tom Savage will later tell the Washington Post, just put in on your books and enjoy the money. Inside VP, the biggest proponent for getting involved in bistro type deals was not Savage, but one of his deputies, Joe Casano, who had risen from the back office to become the chief operating officer of VP, although he had come with sourcing from Drexel. He did not have a quant background, the son of a Brooklyn cop and a graduate of Brooklyn College. Casano had learned the business by starting on the bottom and working his way up. It was Casano who Bentley Master Fears approached about getting involved in bistro, and it was Casano who became the deal's champions internally. The fees will likely be small because the perceived risk was so low, but it was a business that VP would donate. Casano argued the fees will grow considerably over time if this structure proved popular. FP was likely to become the insurer of choice for everybody, super seniors, not just JP Morgan's. And the regulators, once again, they eventually saw things exactly as JP Morgan had hoped they would. They ruled that when banks bought credit protections for their super seniors holdings, they could cut their capital.